Is it possible to make a video that both sides of an argument are going to hate? Because I'm pretty sure I'm about to do that right now. Since the final season aired, there's been nothing but non-stop arguments about Season 8 of Game of Thrones. So that begs the question, did Season 8 suck? So I have a bad habit of being way over-prepared when I make these types of videos. 8 pages of script, in fact. But don't worry, I'm going to keep this one brief, hopefully. Now I'm going on the assumption that most of you have already seen Season 8 of Game of Thrones, so I won't go item by item telling you what happened in the season. But I will give you one final spoiler warning. If you don't want anything spoiled for you, just come back later. Now the intent of this video is not really to persuade or sway anybody's opinion. Instead, I'm just going to talk about some things that I liked and some things that just didn't really make sense. Now keep in mind, some of this is subjective to how I just interpreted it. There were some things that weren't necessarily addressed by the writers or the directors. So without wasting any more of your time, let's just give it a shot. So first things first, let's address the elephant in the room here. I understand the intent of the scene. They wanted to show each character finding comfort in any way that they possibly could because it's their last night possibly being alive. But did we really need to see Arya and Gendry getting it on?
I'm not the Red Woman. Take your own bloody pants off.
It definitely made Maisie Williams uncomfortable. But the episode was criticized for being too dark. Now personally, I didn't have any issues with it being too dark. Unless you're watching this episode in a brightly lit room, then I don't know what to tell you. Because when I watched the episode, I had zero issues. But I thought the decision to make the Dothraki swords on fire and them charging into the darkness was a great decision because you didn't actually see any of the fighting. You just slowly saw the lights going out and you just heard the sounds of death and chaos out there in the darkness. And when we finally saw the dead, it was almost like a literal wave of dead. It totally reminded me of World War Z, the way that they were climbing on top of each other. Now the one thing that kind of struck me odd about this episode was their decision to put all the women, children, and unable to fight down in the crypt. This was kind of predictable and questionable, right? I mean, the audience knew that the dead were going to be risen, right? We've seen that before. And based on the battle at Hardhome, Jon Snow should have known this as well. I mean, there was that whole scene where he's standing at the dock raising his arms and all the dead just rise. That's definitely something I wouldn't forget.
He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people. So, rah.
Now, arguably the biggest moment of this episode was when Arya killed the Night King. Now, the thing that struck me weird about this wasn't actually anything that happened in the episode itself. What struck me weird is how public opinion completely changed like 24 hours after it happened. Right after it happened, social media was on fire talking about how great it was, how unexpected, and how awesome of an ending that was. But by midweek, everybody was criticizing it, saying that it was just trying to subvert expectations and how it should have been Jon Snow. It was really bizarre to me, because I thought it was an awesome ending. And the writers said that they've been teasing this for about 3 years now. One of the items that people bring up when they're talking about this foreshadowing is Melisandre's prophecy.
I see a darkness in you. And in that darkness, eyes staring back at me. Brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes. Eyes you'll shut forever. We will meet again.
It could just be a coincidence, I don't know. Now the other thing that I noticed that could have been foreshadowing was that Bran gave Arya that same dagger that she used to kill the Night King in that exact same spot under the tree.
I don't want it.
Are you sure? It's Valyrian steel.
It's wasted on a cripple.
Now one thing that I don't think was a coincidence was that the Night King was killed underneath a weirwood tree and he was actually created underneath a weirwood tree. So I think they did that to bring it kind of full circle. In addition to that, in this season, Arya snuck up on Jon Snow in that exact same spot in the Godswood. Now that I also don't think was a coincidence. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people were criticizing it, but the cast seemed to enjoy it.
Exterior Godswood, the Night King walks with methodical, terrifying calm. He stops before Bran and raises his sword to strike, but something is hurtling toward him out of the darkness. Arya. She vaults off a pile of dead whites, leaps at the Night King, and she plunges the dagger up through the Night King's armor, and the Night King shatters.
Now some viewers were disappointed that there wasn't a lot of closure on the Night King portion of this season, and they kinda wanted to know who the Night King was. And to an extent, I agree. I kind of wanted to know more about the Night King as well. I kind of wanted them to talk about it a little bit more in dialogue. I didn't really want them to just say Arya is the savior of Winterfell and move on, which they kind of did, so I kind of get that argument. But back in Season 6, they did show how the Night King was created, and they did show who he was. The Children of the Forest created the Night King to protect them from the First Men, and I don't think the Night King was meant to be anybody noteworthy. I think it was just supposed to be he was the Night King. And who knows, maybe the prequels they're filming right now will address that. The other criticism I saw on social media was that there were no major deaths in this episode. Yeah, tell that to Emilia Clarke.
Jorah the Andal battles on. He has been slashed and stabbed, pummeled and pierced, but somehow he keeps fighting. Whites plunge their knives into him. He takes more punishment than Hodor took at the door, than Beric took in the Great Hall, and still somehow Jorah stands and defends his queen. Dany tries to rouse Jorah, but he is gone.
When Jaime knighted Brienne, everybody thought that she was dead. Everybody thought that her character arc had come full circle and the only logical thing for her would be death. Now I'm personally glad they didn't kill her off, but so many people were actually upset about it. And I agree to an extent, none of the main characters died, but there's a reason for that. They had a story to tell. But we definitely did lose some main characters in this episode. We lost the Night King, Melisandre, Theon, Lyanna Mormont, Lord Beric, Ed Tollett, Viserion again, and Jorah. Jorah Mormont's death was pretty pivotal for this episode. It was a major contributor to Dany's mental deterioration. And some people said, wow, winter's been coming for 8 seasons and then it ended in one night. That's kind of a lame criticism if you ask me. Yes, they killed the Night King in one night, but they've been fighting the White Walkers for years. They encountered them in Craster's Keep in Season 4, they fought them at Hardhome in Season 5, and don't forget the Wall in Season 7. I don't know, personally I enjoyed the hell out of the Battle of Winterfell. Daenerys' decision to burn down King's Landing and all those that lived there was probably one of the most divisive moments of Season 8. And the battle was already won, the bells were ringing, why did she still burn everybody alive? Not to mention, Daenerys has never killed anybody that didn't deserve it, right? Well, coincidence or not, bells ringing during a battle was never a good sign in Game of Thrones, and it was mentioned in Season 2 as being a bad omen.
They're welcoming the new king.
I've never known bells to mean surrender.
It's a complete different franchise, but Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars killed all those younglings, so turning heel is something that's pretty common. Now I have a proposition. I think Daenerys was more of a broken queen than she was a mad queen. I mean, think about it. She had a lot of significant losses over the last 2 seasons. She lost Jorah at the Battle of Winterfell. Missandei was murdered right in front of her eyes. 2 of her dragons were killed. Her closest advisors were failing her or betraying her. Jon discovered his lineage, which made it harder for him to love her, and it also threatened her claim to the throne. Not to mention, she was completely obsessed with how people viewed her. She was paranoid that everybody disliked her. During the feast, Tormund was drunkenly boasting Jon's resume, and he said, what kind of person climbs on a dragon? A madman or a king? And when the camera's on Dany, it says madman. And the camera goes back to Jon, and it says a king.
He climbed on a fucking dragon and fought. What kind of person climbs on a fucking dragon? A madman or a king?
I mean, throughout the season, Daenerys is just visibly upset at how much the Northfolk love Jon Snow. I mean, let's be honest, the hints were there all along that she was going to make this change. If you watched the scene where Cersei ordered the mountain to cut off Missandei's head and didn't think she was going to burn that bitch to the ground, then I don't know what to tell you. I mean, Missandei's last words were Dracarys, and there's a chance that Daenerys didn't actually even hear her say that, but be honest, when somebody says Dracarys in this show, what usually happens?
Dracarys.
Dracarys. Dracarys.
But really, once Jon revealed that he was actually Aegon Targaryen, all bets were off. She was gonna do it. I mean, she told Jon to keep it quiet, but he refused. And as soon as Jon told Dany that he was gonna tell his sisters his true identity, she just snapped, and her demeanor immediately changed from hysterical to almost pissed.
I've never begged for anything, but I'm begging you. Don't do this, please.
You are my queen. Nothing will change that.
And they're my family. We can live together.
We can. I've just told you how.
Varys even tried to poison Daenerys. Now he was unsuccessful, but when Tyrion told Daenerys of Varys' plot, she accused him of malicious intent in trying to tear her down with rumors. And she threatened him a few times, and we saw this building, and then obviously she had Varys killed. But Daenerys still loves Jon Snow, so she confronted him after that. And that's when she told him that I don't have love here, only fear. And before they even marched on King's Landing, she basically rationalized burning it to the ground.
Do you believe we're here for a reason, Lord Varys? I'm here to free the world from tyrants. That is my destiny. And I will serve it no matter the cost.
Remember what Varys said about destiny?
I've served tyrants most of my life. They all talk about destiny.
Tyrion told her that thousands would die if the city burned.
Thousands of children will die if the city burns.
Your sister knows how to use her enemy's weaknesses against them. That's what she thinks our mercy is. Weakness.
I beg you, my
But
queen.
she's wrong. Mercy is our strength. Our mercy towards future generations. He will never again be held hostage by a tyrant.
And we're supposed to just ignore Daenerys' long track record of cruelty? She basically chooses who's evil, who stands in her way. So she can be judge, jury, and executioner, basically. And it didn't seem to shock Kit Harington. I think it's going to divide. But if you track Dany's story all the way back, she does some terrible things. She crucifies people, she burns people alive. This has been building. So we have to say to the audience, you're in denial about this woman as well. You knew something was wrong, you're culpable, and you cheered her on. Look, I get it, your favorite character went mad and killed everybody. And I'm sorry if you named your kid Khaleesi, Dany, or Daenerys, but that's not our problem. Maybe you should wait to see how a show plays out before you name your kid after a mass murderer. Just a thought. Now I've been talking about her descent into madness, but I have to talk about Emilia Clarke. Because her performance when she decided to burn down King's Landing was incredible. For most of that scene, it was literally just her on top of a green screen. So she had nothing to play off of, and she did a phenomenal job acting. And I thought that speech she gave in the finale was kind of cool. It kind of gave me a First Order kind of vibe from Star Wars. But at the end of the day, I thought that the way it ended was great. I thought Jon Snow killing her was the way it had to be. And I don't think Jon Snow went into the throne room predetermined to kill her. I think after he talked to her, he realized that she was just too far gone. I don't know, I've been harping on this way too long. I'm gonna move on. So many people were angry that Bran was named king. Me, personally, I thought it was kinda cool. In episode 2, waiting for the Night King to show up, Bran tells Tyrion about his entire journey. So it kinda made sense why Tyrion would nominate him in the end.
You've had a strange journey.
Stranger than most.
I'd like to hear about it.
It's a long story.
If only we were trapped in a castle. In the middle of winter with nowhere to go.
And he mentioned the wheelchair that Daeon Targaryen's crippled nephew had. There's no way he would have known that if he wasn't the three-eyed raven, first of all.
This is clever. Even better than the saddle I designed for you.
It's the same as the one Daeron Targaryen built for his crippled nephew 120 years ago. I liked that one.
You know our history better than anyone. That'll be useful as Lord of Winterfell.
I'm not Lord of Winterfell.
You're the only surviving true-born son of Ned Stark. You don't want it.
I don't really want anymore.
Real quick, remember what Varys said?
Have you considered the best ruler might be someone who doesn't want to rule?
Someone who doesn't want to rule.
But why not Jon or Tyrion for the throne, everybody asks. Well, Tyrion actually said that he decided that he wasn't good enough to be king. He said that his past condemned his future, and naming Jon Snow king would anger everybody who followed Daenerys, including Grey Worm, and probably start a long and intense war. Now, a lot of people got hung up on this line of dialogue.
I'm not that person anymore.
You still would be, if you hadn't pushed me out of that window. And I would still be Brandon Stark.
You're not?
No. I'm something else now.
Now, I don't think that was meant to be taken literally. I mean, Bran is still Bran, but I think he's just suggesting that he's something more now. And one thing to notice at the end of the show is that Bran actually changes his sigil. Instead of the usual Stark direwolf, it's actually a raven, and that's shown on Brienne's armor. So maybe he isn't a Stark anymore. Now, a lot of people got riled up with the fact that Jaime Lannister slept with Brienne of Tarth and then took off and went back to King's Landing. Jaime was always going to end up with Cersei. That was always going to happen. Brienne of Tarth is literally everything that's good in a person, and Jaime is pretty much the opposite. Not to mention, he has a child with Cersei, and everybody was mad that Jaime's redemption arc amounted to nothing. Well, personally, I don't give a damn. Not everybody deserves a redemption arc. We're talking about the same guy that pushed a kid out of a window because he wanted to diddle his sister.
Bye, Felicia.
And a lot of people got mad because Euron Greyjoy's character was wasted. But what about it was wasted? What were you hoping him to achieve? He was never going to achieve anything. He was always a plot device, and that was it. Jon Snow's fate was also foreshadowed.
I wish I was going with you. This is farewell then. You never know.
A lot of people complained that Jon being Aegon Targaryen had nothing to do with the story. It was pointless. And I could not disagree more. Because if he wasn't a Targaryen, Ned Stark would not have had to protect him. Robert would have wanted to kill him because he was a Targaryen. It's also probably the reason that Drogon didn't murder him a bunch of times. Not to mention, it's the reason that Jon didn't want to keep slamming his aunt. Why is there a Night's Watch if the White Walkers are dead? Well, although the primary purpose is fulfilled, Tyrion literally says in the finale,
There's still a Night's Watch.
The world will always need a home for bastards and broken men.
This is literally addressed in dialogue, and somehow people are still complaining. Maybe if you would pay attention, you wouldn't have so many issues with the story. Now I have to touch on it, the items left in the scene. The coffee cups and the water bottles. Now the coffee cup, yeah, that was definitely a mistake, and I thought it was kind of interesting that a lot of people decided to use that as ammunition against the show writers, when in reality that's probably more of a set manager. And yeah, it was definitely a big mistake, and I can't believe nobody caught it. But they rectified their mistake not even 24 hours afterwards, so to me it's not that big of a deal. As far as the water bottles, I don't know how any of you guys even saw that. You must be looking at things to be mad about, because I literally was not looking at his feet at all during that scene, and I really don't know why many people would be. But like the coffee cup, this one doesn't really bug me that much either, because there are so many instances of things being left in scenes from classic movies in the past. For example, the hydraulic tank in Gladiator. There's also a white van that was left in a scene in Braveheart, and in Pirates of the Caribbean there was a random guy with a cowboy hat on. So like I said, I mean, sure, it's kind of a thing that they shouldn't have left in, but it doesn't really break the immersion for me because it's like such a small thing that I never would have noticed anyway. And then there's that scene where Tyrion sneaks into Jaime's tent when he's been captured, and they have that touching moment where they talk about how his childhood would have been so bad without Jaime. And after Daenerys burned down King's Landing and Tyrion finds the bodies of Jaime and Cersei, give that man all the awards. Now hands down, probably the biggest complaint that I hear is that it was rushed. There was rushed pacing to this season. Some of the reasons that they had to do things accelerated were actually written into the plot. For example, after the Battle of Winterfell, Sansa tells Daenerys that all their men are exhausted and they need some time to recoup. And obviously with everything going on in Dany's head, she doesn't want to wait, so she makes them rush to King's Landing. Now that doesn't excuse everything, but that's also just one thing. Now you have to remember that in this show, time jumps are not uncommon. For example, after the Battle of Winterfell, in the next episode, they're lighting all the funeral pyres. Well, it takes time to clean up that many dead people. So it's not unrealistic to think that there were a couple of days between when the battle actually happened and when the next episode started. Not to mention, back in Season 1, Episode 1, they said that it takes a month to get from King's Landing to Winterfell.
Take me to your crypt. I want to pay my respects.
We've been riding for a month, my love. Surely the dead can wait.
So every time you see somebody go from Winterfell to King's Landing or vice versa, it's usually taking them about a month. And a lot of people didn't like that the season was only 6 episodes, but I tend to agree with them wanting to finish the season instead of dragging it out. And a lot of people thought that because the seasons were shorter, Dany and Jon's romance was a little bit rushed. But how many times do you need to see Jon and Dany get it on before you get the idea? We don't need to see everything, and there's only so much dialogue you can put in there before it just becomes filler. If they drew the show out, I could totally see people complaining about filler and setup episodes. I can guarantee it. But again, going back to the time jump, it takes a month to get from Winterfell to King's Landing, so Daenerys had a month to just be with her thoughts about how much she lost. And a lot of people complained about the fast travel in this show, but as I mentioned, it's been happening for a long time. Theon left his sister and said he wanted to go fight at Winterfell, and then the next episode he was already at Winterfell. Well, it takes about a month, like I said, to get from King's Landing to Winterfell. This happened a few times in the show, but it's easily explainable. The reason it seems like fast travel is because not everything's actually happening simultaneously in the show. You can't show everything happening at the same time because obviously you can only focus on one thing at a time. So at some point you have to realize that not everything's happening simultaneously, and something you're seeing might have happened a little bit in the past. Now another scene that there's just so much criticism on is when Rhaegal gets shot out of the sky. Now a lot of the criticism comes from a Dan and David quote about how Dany forgot about the Iron Fleet.
While Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces, they certainly haven't forgotten about her, and they're just waiting for her to come back.
Now I don't necessarily think she literally forgot about the Iron Fleet's existence. I think they were trying to say that her focus wasn't on them because after the Battle of Winterfell she had a whole month to just be in her feelings and think about everything she's lost. Honestly, they probably should have just kept their mouth shut about it. In scenes like that, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that hey, maybe they were behind the mountains or something like that and you couldn't see them. Was she distracted maybe? I don't know, it was kind of a weird scene, but they did have the drop on her, so I do understand why Rhaegal would have died there. And a lot of people were annoyed that the Scorpions were so pinpoint accurate when they killed Rhaegal, but when they were shooting at Drogon, they couldn't hit him at all. But in that same episode, whenever they killed Rhaegal, they were shooting at Drogon and they missed. I think they just had the drop on Rhaegal. I think that was the intent of it at least. The Dothraki are back. Well, they were never gone. A lot of people think that all the Dothraki were dead at the Battle of Winterfell, but if you actually pay attention, they say that only half of each unit type was killed. Half the Dothraki, half the Unsullied, half the Northerners, and it's actually shown in the season.
How far gone?
The Northmen as well.
As you can tell by now, there's a lot of things that people are complaining about, but there's usually an explanation for most of them. And here's another one. People are mad that whenever they attack King's Landing, that supposedly all the good guys lost all their morals and they started killing everybody in sight. Well, remember, the Unsullied have no morals and they do whatever Daenerys tells them to do, and Daenerys was burning the city down. The Dothraki have shown that they can pretty much be savages whenever they want. In Westeros, they're considered savages. As far as Grey Worm, he was happy to kill. He was in love with Missandei and they killed her right in front of his eyes. And for everybody left there, mob mentality. We've all seen it. One person does something wrong, the others think they can get away with it. It's not right, but it happens. And I know I'm just rattling off criticisms at this point, but at some point somebody has to address them. Because a lot of these are nitpicky and things that if you just paid attention to, you would understand why. It's such an easy explanation that's why I think people are just looking for things to be upset about. Now I've talked enough about specific criticisms and things that I like, so I'm going to talk about the overarching reception and how people liked the season or if they didn't. A lot of people claim that this season was the season of fan service, of trying to make people feel good. But I completely disagree because if that were the case, people wouldn't be complaining so much about the way Cersei died. Not every death needs to be gruesome and over the top. I think Cersei's death was perfect. Jaime did always say that he was gonna die in the arms of the woman he loved, so it happened. Honestly, a lot of these criticisms to me boil down to expectations. I think because we waited so long for season 8 that people just let their expectations run wild and get away from them. And in many cases, their expectations were never going to be met because they were just so lofty. And it's weird to me that a lot of people wanted that Disney Avengers ending. They wanted that happily ever after. But this is Game of Thrones. You were never going to get that. It's weird to see so many people that wanted either Daenerys to win and killed the big bad witch Cersei, or they wanted Jon Snow to kill Daenerys and become king and be happily ever after. Well, like I said, that was never going to happen. That was never in the cards. If you wanted a happily ever after, this is not the show for you. And I think a lot of those same people are the people that signed this stupid petition. I mean, how entitled do you have to be to write a petition demanding them to rewrite season 8? And a lot of people say it wasn't actually about writing season 8, it was about sending a message. Yeah, well, it was a stupid one. Just think about the precedent that sets for future shows. If you don't like the way that show ends, just write a petition about it. George R.R. Martin has famously said that art is not a democracy.
You know, much as I love my fans, I've also been known to say art is not a democracy.
Sophie Turner, who plays Sansa Stark, really didn't care for this petition either. She said, "All of these petitions and things like that, for people to just rubbish it because it's not what they wanted to see, is just disrespectful." Isaac Hempstead Wright, who plays Bran, also had some thoughts on the topic as well. "I saw today there's a petition to redo the ending. It's just absurd. I can't even fathom it. It's ridiculous that people think they can demand a different ending because they don't like it. What people were hoping for is an Avengers-esque thing where all the superpowers are explained and everybody comes together. And there's a big team effort. Game of Thrones isn't like that. It's unpredictable by nature. In my opinion, it's a great ending. I don't think it's some plot twist to be shocking for the sake of shocking. I think it's a genuine character development. The fact that characters are not doing what people want them to do, it's a good thing. The fact that people are getting pissed off and having a big emotional response, that's the reason why Game of Thrones is successful. It doesn't do what everybody wants them to do. If people really, really hate the season, then so be it. But it's been 7 or 8 years of absolutely brilliant television that captivated the world. I think people will remember it as a fabulous journey that I've been a part of, no matter the opinion on the ending." And a lot of people have taken this season as an opportunity to take liberties at the writers of the show. People are claiming that Dan and David were only carried by the source material. Well, the finale to Season 5 marked the end of the source material, and people seem to have loved Season 6, and Season 7 actually had some pretty good reviews. So I think that criticism is bullshit. Not to mention, George R.R. Martin has been quoted as saying that the overarching ending for the story is the same as in his books.
You had once been quoted as saying that you would find it alarming if they caught up, if the series got ahead of you.
Well, I didn't. Yes, I was. It was a blow when the series caught up. I didn't think it would happen.
When it was clear they were catching up, you told them over a kind of an overarching future of where you saw the last 2 books going in terms of plot?
Yes, and you know, the major beats. I mean, obviously we're talking here about several days of story conferences taking place in my home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But there's no way to get in all the detail.
Right.
All the minor characters, all the secondary characters. The series has been extremely faithful compared to 97% of all television and movie adaptations of literary properties, but it's not completely faithful, and it can't be. Otherwise, it would have to run another 5 seasons.
I mean, do you worry that some fans will have Dan and David's ending in their mind's eye? Would that be a disappointment to you?
I don't think Dan and Dave's ending is going to be that different from my ending because of the conversations we did have. But they may be on certain secondary characters. There may be big differences. And yeah, some of the people will have that. There will be a debate, I'm sure. I think a lot of people who say, oh, Dan and Dave's ending is better than the one George gave us. It's a good thing they changed it. And there will be a lot of people who say, no, Dan and Dave got it wrong, George's ending is better, and they will all fight on the internet, and there will be a debate. And that's fine.
I don't know, I just think it's funny that Season 8 turns out the way that people don't like it, and everybody turns into an Emmy-winning writer, claiming lazy writing or poor writing, things like that. I mean, hell, at this point it's become trendy to hate on Season 8. And I'm not saying it's the best thing ever, I just think a lot of the criticisms are super nitpicky because the show ended a way that people didn't want it to end. And I also think people were just upset that it was ending. I mean, somebody completely fabricated a lie that HBO reused a scene in Season 8. I'm not even joking. The accusation was that there was a scene that Jon Snow was petting Ghost in Season 4 that they recycled in Season 8 because people were complaining about it. First off, no, HBO doesn't care that much to go back and put that scene in. And second of all, it's clearly not the same scene. Anyway, I've been talking way too much about this damn show. I just need to wrap this video up. As you can see by the ratings I'm putting on the screen now, obviously Season 8 was not the most liked season for a lot of the audience. Critics as well. Me personally, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now a 7 out of 10 is a pretty conservative score for me. That usually means it wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the best either. I acknowledge that there were some things in Season 8 that they just didn't do right. But at the same time, just having small errors like that doesn't completely ruin the integrity of the show. In my opinion, it doesn't even change the ending for me. I just think wrapping up a show like this is incredibly hard, and given the circumstances, I thought they did a pretty good job of it. Even though this season had its problems, I thought it was still a fantastic show. I don't know, I guess in keeping with the theme of this video, just smash that dislike button below, and leave me some hate comments because I probably won't read them. This video definitely ended up being longer than I hoped it would, so don't get your hopes up because I'm never doing this ever again.